The night belonged to the Vampire King, as it always had. Cold lantern light glinting off black stone towers while nobles bowed and guards cleared the streets before him. And yet in a narrow alley just beyond the Grand Avenue, a place the powerful never noticed, a young woman sat on the ground beside a broken prom, her cloak torn thin by years of hunger and cold, rocking it gently as if it held a living child, though inside was only a worn teddy bear wrapped in faded cloth, the last thing she had protected when the world took everything else from her. She was poor, invisible, and whispered about as mad, mocked earlier that evening by passers-by who laughed at her murmured lullaby. But she kept singing anyway, soft and steady, because kindness was the only thing she still owned, and she refused to let even that be stolen. The Vampire King passed the alley without turning his head, his crimson eyes fixed forward, duty heavy on his shoulders, his gloved hand resting near the blade he had not drawn in a century, believing weakness was a luxury rulers could not afford. But his young son slowed, small fingers tightening around his father's hand, his gaze drawn by the song curling through the night like a forgotten promise, the melody slipping past guards in power and fear, reaching somewhere deep and untouched. The woman leaned over the prom, shielding the bear from the wind with her body, whispering, "Sleep, little moon, the night keeps you safe," and the child prince stopped completely, his breath catching as recognition struck him with the certainty only children possess. The king tugged his son forward, voice sharp and controlled, telling him not to stare, not to linger, because the realm had laws and order and no place for broken things. Yet the boy resisted, turned, and in a voice small but unshakable, said the words that shattered centuries of iron restraint. "Papa, that's Mama," and the world seemed to pause, sound draining from the street as the king turned slowly, unwilling and afraid, his gaze landing on the woman's face lit by a flickering lamp, her hair silver blonde and tangled, her cheeks hollow with hunger, and there, unmistakable, a faint scar along her temple, a scar his thumb remembered tracing in another lifetime. The woman looked up only briefly, eyes dulled by hardship, not recognizing him, shrinking back instinctively as power pressed toward her, clutching the prom like a shield, while the king's mind raced, denying the impossible, reminding himself that the past was buried, that mercy had costs, that love had once made him weak. Yet his son stepped forward, humming the lullaby with perfect memory, and the woman's lips trembled as she continued the song without knowing why, voice cracking but unwavering. Guards shifted, nobles whispered from a distance, and the king stood frozen between command and truth, between the ruler he had become and the man he had buried, finally forcing his feet to move away, ordering the procession forward. But this time he did not pull his son, and as they walked on, the alley felt colder. The song followed them like a ghost, and deep inside the Vampire King, something long dead began to stir, because the night he had tried to erase had just spoken his name. The palace slept, but the young prince did not, the image of the woman in the alley burning behind his eyes, her voice looping endlessly in his mind until it felt louder than the silence of silk-draped walls. And when the moon climbed higher, he slipped from his bed barefoot, clutching the small wooden moon he always kept hidden, the one no servant could explain and no tutor dared touch. Moving through corridors he knew better than maps, because loneliness teaches children how to disappear. A loyal guard noticed him too late, and when the prince looked up with calm certainty and said he needed to see his mother, the man followed without questions, as if truth itself had taken command. The alley was darker now, colder, the prom barely visible, but the woman was still there, curled around it like a shield, whispering comfort to the night as though it listened, flinching when footsteps approached, because every sound had taught her fear. Yet when the child stepped forward and began humming her lullaby, her breath caught so sharply it hurt, the melody stitching something torn inside her, and without understanding why, she finished the song with him, their voices trembling together in the broken space between stone and shadow. The prince lifted the wooden moon and held it out, telling her she made it for him long ago, that she called him Little Moon when the night scared him. And though her mind screamed confusion, her hands reached out on instinct, fingers shaking as they brushed the smooth wood, a rush of sensation flooding her chest. Warmth, weight, a child pressed against her heart. And she whispered the name again, like a prayer she had forgotten how to say. From the palace, far above, the vampire king woke with a sharp intake of breath, as if struck. Shadows rippling across his chamber, the ancient magic bound to his blood, reacting to something awakened. Something he had sworn was dead, and before dawn. His son collapsed during council, fever blazing, dark tendrils of unstable power flickering over his skin. Healers summoned in panic as nobles murmured fearfully. Because when heirs burn with uncontrolled magic, it means the heart has been wounded beyond reason. The king carried the boy himself, command cracking into urgency, watching helplessly as potions failed and spells slid off like water, until the child whispered one name again and again through delirium. A name the court did not know, but the king did, and with a decision that shattered protocol, he ordered the guards to bring the woman from the alley. She was dragged into the palace, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, terrified by brightness and marble in eyes that finally looked at her too much, clutching her teddy bear like a lifeline. Freezing at the sight of the child, pale in a bed far too large, but when she felt his heat, heard his broken breathing, fear fell away, replaced by something ancient and fierce, and without waiting for permission, she gathered him into her arms, rocking him gently, humming the lullaby as naturally as breathing. The fever broke almost instantly, the shadows retreating as if soothed, the child's breathing evening beneath her touch, and the king watched from the edge of the room as memory slammed into her in fragments. Firelight, screaming voices, hands tearing her away. A pain so sharp it split her soul, tears streaming down her face as she whispered the boy's name without knowing how she knew it, holding him like the world might steal him again. Dawn crept through the windows, and for the first time in centuries, the vampire king felt something more terrifying than power settle in his chest. Hope, because the woman everyone called broken had just saved his son, and the truth he buried was beginning to breathe. Morning spread slowly through the palace, pale light touching marble halls that had not known mercy in centuries. And the woman from the alley woke in a guest chamber wrapped in silk she did not recognize, her body stiff with fear, her mind crowded with half-memories that refused to settle, while servants whispered outside the door, unsure whether to bow or recoil, because no one understood why a beggar now slept beneath the same roof as kings. When she tried to leave, guards gently but firmly stopped her, their politeness sharp with tension, and she learned quickly that safety inside a palace could feel more suffocating than danger on the streets. Every glance weighing her worth, every whisper judging whether she deserved to breathe the same air. The vampire king did not come to her at first, but his presence was everywhere, in the doubled guards, in the orders that she be fed before anyone else, in the way no one dared speak cruelly within earshot. And though he never touched her, never spoke her name, his protection wrapped around her like invisible armor, confusing and overwhelming, because she had survived so long with nothing that even kindness felt like a trap. The nobles noticed everything, sharp eyes catching how the prince clung to her hand when allowed, how his laughter returned only when she was near, and resentment bloomed behind jeweled smiles, because power shifts frighten those who profit from cruelty. And soon the murmurs began, calling her a fraud, a spellcaster, a trick meant to weaken the throne. One afternoon, a noblewoman stopped her in the gallery, voice dripping with false sweetness as she mocked the torn past clinging to her despite clean clothes, accusing her of manipulating the king through pity. laughing softly when the woman lowered her gaze in shame, until the temperature in the room dropped and the vampire king stepped forward, his voice calm and lethal as he reminded the court that respect was not optional, and that anyone who insulted his guest insulted the crown itself. The noblewoman paling as instant karma settled like iron around her throat. Yet protection drew danger, and that night, while the woman slept clutching her teddy bear like a child, a shadow slipped through servant passages carrying a blade etched with ancient sigils. Intent sharp and merciless, but the vampire king was waiting, catching the assassin before steel met skin, crimson eyes blazing as he demanded names that would never be spoken, because poison ended the man before secrets could escape. The attempt changed everything. Walls that once felt safe now whispered threat. And the king ordered the palace sealed, knowing the past had not stayed buried by accident, that someone had benefited from her disappearance, and would kill again to keep the lie alive. When he finally stood before her on Thebelkeny overlooking the city, the distance between them heavy with unspoken years, she told him she did not understand why he protected her, why the child felt like home, why his presence hurt in a way both frightening and familiar. And when she whispered that he felt like a storm she had once trusted, something in his control fractured, because he knew then she was not a stranger to his soul, only lost to it. He did not promise love, did not ask forgiveness, but he vowed quietly that no one would harm her again, that the truth would be dragged into the light, no matter the cost. And as she looked out over the city that had discarded her, feeling strength stir beneath fear, she realized for the first time that survival was no longer enough, because the palace that feared her name was about to learn why it should have remembered it. Asterisk the High Court did not wait long to strike, because power hates uncertainty, and by the second night the summons rang through the palace like a blade against stone, demanding the woman be presented before the nobles to answer for herself, her existence now labeled a threat to order rather than a mystery of fate. And as guards escorted her through halls lined with watching eyes, she felt every step tremble beneath the weight of judgment, her hands cold despite the warmth of borrowed silk, her mind flickering with images she could not place, fire and marble, and a child's cry echoing behind her ribs. The vampire king walked beside her without touching, his presence steady and unyielding, and though he did not speak comfort, the way he positioned himself half a step ahead of her told the room everything it needed to know, that she stood under his protection, not his doubt. Lords rose one by one, their voices smooth with accusation, calling her a planted illusion, a madwoman feeding off royal sympathy, questioning why a beggar should matter to immortals, until one ancient house demanded the ultimate proof, invoking the blood right, an old magic so absolute it could not be lied to, a ritual that would bind truth to blood and expose fraud without mercy. The chamber went still, because everyone understood the risk, that if she failed, she would not leave alive, and if she succeeded, centuries of carefully maintained lies would collapse. But before the king could answer, the prince stepped forward, small hand trembling yet firm as he held hers, his voice clear as he said he was not afraid, because his mother would never hurt him. And the simple certainty of a child shook the court more than threats ever could. The vampire king accepted the challenge, his voice calm as death, as he declared the rite would be performed in 3 nights before the full court, giving no ground, no explanation, because he knew delay was the only way to protect her long enough to uncover who wanted her erased. And as the nobles withdrew to plot and whisper, the woman was led back to her chamber shaking, fear finally breaking through the fragile strength she had been building. That night, memories surged harder than before, ripping through her sleep without mercy, her body arching in pain as she relived hands restraining her, voices arguing over her fate, a spell burning through her mind like fire poured into glass, fragments scattering, identity splintering to keep her alive. And when she woke screaming, The vampire king was there, not as a ruler, but as a man who could not bear her pain, steadying her without words, letting her cry without judgment, his silence louder than promises. In the quiet after, she asked why it hurt to look at him, why her heart reacted before her mind, and when he told her she had loved him once, and that he had failed her. The truth landed softly but irrevocably, not restoring memory, but planting roots of understanding. And though she could not yet forgive what she did not fully remember, she did not pull away when he took her hand, feeling something settle into place, as if the night itself approved. Outside the chamber, enemies moved, alliances tightened, and knives were sharpened in polite shadows. But inside, something rare was forming. Trust born not of power but of endurance. And as the moon rose toward fullness, the woman everyone tried to erase stood a little taller, knowing the coming trial would either destroy her or return her name to the world. And for the first time since the alley, she chose to face it, not as a beggar begging for mercy, but as a mother protecting her child and a soul demanding the truth. Asterisk. The ritual chamber had not been opened in a century, its black stone walls carved with ancient sigils that glowed faintly as the full moon reached its peak. And when the woman stepped inside barefoot, dressed in simple white, the court watched in breathless silence. Because power recognizes moments that cannot be undone, moments when lies finally run out of places to hide. She stood at the center of the circle, hands trembling despite her resolve, the prince at the edge gripping his father's fingers, his presence anchoring her more than any magic ever could, while the vampire king faced the assembled nobles with a stillness that promised consequence rather than debate. The blood rite began with a cut to her palm, crimson drops striking the stone in awakening sigils older than the throne itself. And as the magic surged, pain ripped through her like lightning, memories slamming back in violent waves, childbirth and firelight, her scream swallowed to protect her newborn, hands dragging her away as she begged for her child, the spell tearing at her mind to keep her alive but empty. And she cried out, collapsing to her knees as the court murmured uneasily, some in triumph, others in fear. The nobles who had demanded the right watched closely, ready to declare failure, but then the prince broke free, rushing into the circle despite gasps and shouted warnings, pressing his small, bleeding hand to hers, blood mingling without ritual or permission. And the chamber shook violently as the sigils flared white-hot, reacting to something purer than ceremony, a bond no law could fake. The magic surged again, but this time it stabilized, wrapping around them both, revealing truth not as words, but as undeniable force. Images flooding the air like living memory, the woman holding the child as an infant, the king standing beside her younger and unbroken, whispering promises beneath night-blooming flowers. And the court recoiled as the truth burned away doubt, the sigils sealing the bond with finality. A cry rang out then, not of wonder but of fury, as one of the oldest lords lunged forward, blade drawn, desperate to end what had been exposed. But the vampire king moved faster, catching the traitor mid-strike, his voice echoing through the chamber as he demanded the truth. And under the crushing weight of royal power, the man confessed, admitting the purge had not been absolute, that certain lives were spared and minds broken to preserve bloodlines while consolidating control, that the woman's survival threatened everything they had built on fear and secrecy. The confession shattered the court, nobles shouting accusations as alliances fractured in real time, instant karma rippling outward, as those who had mocked and plotted were dragged forward by guards, their power stripped with brutal efficiency, while the woman knelt shaking, the ritual finally ending as the magic settled into quiet certainty. The vampire king crossed the chamber and knelt before her in front of everyone, not as ruler but as penitent, pressing his forehead to hers, acknowledging her as the mother of his heir and the woman wronged by his silence. And in that moment, the court understood that this was no longer a question of legitimacy, but of justice. She did not rise immediately, did not claim titles or demand crowns. But when she finally stood, holding her son close, something in her posture had changed, fear no longer leading her steps. And as enemies were led away and the chamber emptied, the truth remained unmovable and alive, because the night itself had chosen a side, and it had chosen the woman who survived. Dawn arrived quietly, pale light spilling over a city that had already begun to change. Because truth does not end when a ritual closes, it spreads, and by morning, the Night Dominion whispered a single name with awe and unease, no longer as rumor, but as reality. The woman who had been cast into the shadows, now standing at the center of power without asking for it. She woke in a sunlit chamber with her son curled against her chest, his breathing steady and warm. And for the first time, the fear that had ruled her nights loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile sense of belonging that felt both terrifying and precious. While the vampire king stood at the balcony watching the city, knowing the throne beneath him had shifted forever. The high court reconvened at noon, stripped of ceremony and arrogance. Nobles standing rather than sitting as justice was delivered, not with cruelty, but with precision. The traitorous houses exposed, their wealth seized, their influence dissolved, not out of vengeance, but necessity, because a realm built on lies cannot stand. And the king made it clear that no one, not even himself, was above accountability. He admitted his failure openly, his voice steady as he acknowledged the purge had been used to mask fear and control. That mercy had been twisted into cruelty, and though some nobles bristled, the people beyond the palace walls heard something new in their ruler's words. Responsibility, and it changed the way they looked toward the throne. When he turned to the woman, he did not crown her, did not bind her to a role she had not chosen, but offered her a place by his side only if she wished it, giving her the dignity of choice after centuries of theft. And she surprised the court by asking for time, because healing could not be commanded, and love could not be owed. In the days that followed, she walked the palace and the city freely, speaking with servants, with children, with those once invisible like herself, and everywhere she went, people bowed not to power, but to survival, recognizing themselves in her endurance, while the prince never left her side, laughter returning to him like a sunrise after endless night. The vampire king watched her from a distance, learning patience he had never practiced, proving devotion through actions rather than promises, ensuring her safety, dismantling the systems that had crushed her. And when memories returned fully at last, not in fire but in warmth, she remembered everything, the love they had shared, the betrayal that broke her, and the man who now stood before her changed by loss. On the highest balcony, beneath a sky bruised with stars, she finally spoke her choice, not as a beggar rescued nor a queen restored, but as a woman who had survived the worst of power and kindness alike, telling him she would stay, not because he was a king, but because he was trying to be better. And when he took her hand, the night itself seemed to breathe easier. The court watched as the vampire king did something no ruler before him had done. He stepped back just enough to let love walk beside him rather than behind. And in that simple shift, the realm found a new balance. The story of the beggar ended there. But the story of the queen began quietly, built not on fear but respect. And when the prince whispered "Mama" again, she answered with a smile that carried the weight of every night she had survived. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving."